Hello and welcome to the American Circus Program, a podcast aimed at what is unique about issues from the American perspective. Our goal on this show is to expose personalities, issues, and truths, and have you judge them as heroes, as rebels, or as saints. And that's the Three-Ring American Circus, and I'm Arnie Pickholz. In 20th century America, we take the notion of freedom for granted. We have freedom of speech, we vote, and we are free to vote. It's a fact that in America there are 5 freedoms. The First Amendment protects speech, religion, press, assembly, and the right to petition the government. Together, these 5 guaranteed freedoms make the people of the United States of America the freest in the world. There's no legal age you have to reach to exercise your First Amendment freedoms. They are guaranteed to you the day you're born or are naturalized. The First Amendment prevents government from requiring you to say something you don't want to, or keeping you from hearing or reading the words of others. And to clarify the right to petition, the least known First Amendment freedom, it is crucial to our democratic republic's form of government. Petition is the right to ask government at any level to right a wrong or correct a problem. Shakespeare wrote,
"What can be happier than for a man, conscious of virtuous acts, and content with liberty, to despise all human affairs?"
The ability to speak one's mind, particularly to others on a world stage, is one of the most obvious attributes of liberty. Today, we're witnessing various challenges to liberty, from dictators, anarchists, politicians, friends, and even family, in a very divided and partisan world. Here is a symbol of liberty in America, the Statue of Liberty, a gift from the French. She is the most iconic symbol of freedom in what is touted as the most free country in the world, as she speaks the words of Emma Lazarus, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses, yearning to breathe free." She was an idea that goes back to the American Civil War, to an America that was about to belch up a concept of liberty that would include an enslaved population of almost 4 million people, all Americans, all entitled to a liberty guaranteed to them by a Constitution ratified on September 17th, 1787. But what did liberty mean before and after that fateful year? How did the concept of liberty play out then and now? We'll bring you the voices of the American Revolution and the voices we hear today in the revolution occurring in Ukraine. Are they similar or are they different? Before the American Revolution, freedom was defined less as a political or social status than as a spiritual condition. The Roman philosopher Seneca wrote,
"Show me a man who isn't a slave. One is a slave to sex, another to money, another to ambition."
The Christian world in the 16th and 1700s considered the idea of liberation as a spiritual condition rather than a worldly one. To them, it was all about the fall of man into his lusts and passions. Freedom meant abandoning this life of sin to embrace the teachings of the Bible, where the Spirit of God is there in liberty. A high-minded approach that looked at the notion of servitude and freedom as some sort of spiritual combination for enlightenment. In a 1645 speech to the Massachusetts legislature that epitomized Puritan conceptions of freedom, John Winthrop, the colony's governor, said,
"Natural liberty is a liberty to evil, and moral liberty, a liberty to do only what is good."
His definition of freedom was felt in self-denial, in a moral code with severe restraints on freedom of speech, religion, movement, and personal behavior. It's clear to see how the religious teachings of the 17th century were bound into the influence of the church. The Puritans looked at freedom, particularly personal freedom, as the opposite liberty. For the record, the population of the American colonies at this time was less than 18 million people. The religious revivals of the late colonial era, known to historians as the Great Awakening, reinforced this understanding of freedom. On the eve of independence, ministers like Jonathan Butcher were insisting that
true liberty meant a liberty to do everything that is right, and being restrained from doing anything that is wrong, not a right to do everything that we please.
John Locke wrote,
Liberty means not leaving every person free to do as he desired, but having a standing rule to live by, common to every one of that society, and made by the legislative power.
the legislative power, in other words, by a civil government. Belief in freedom was at the root of our quest for liberty, but British freedom was anything but universal. Nationalist, often xenophobic, it viewed nearly every other nation on earth as enslaved to popery, tyranny, or barbarism. John Dryden wrote,
Freedom in no other land will thrive. Freedom is an English subject's sole prerogative.
Britain saw no contradiction between proclaiming themselves citizens of a land of freedom precisely when British ships were transporting millions of Africans to bondage in the New World.
Генерал армии Шойгу.
Россия всегда выступала за создание системы равной и неделимой безопасности. Системы, которая жизненно необходима всему мировому сообществу. В декабре прошлого года мы предложили заключить договор о гарантиях безопасности. Россия призывала Запад к честному диалогу, к поиску разумных, компромиссных решений, к учету интересов друг друга. Все напрасно. Страны НАТО не захотели нас услышать. А это значит, что на самом деле у них были совершенно другие планы. И мы это видим. В открытую шла подготовка к очередной карательной операции на Донбассе, к вторжению на наши исторические земли, включая Крым.
Vladimir Putin's violation of Ukrainian sovereignty has seen an arbitrary and reckless use of force against the Ukrainian people. However, this war is more than a mere land grab for Putin. The war in Ukraine is fundamentally a showdown between liberty and tyranny.
Freedom in America in the 17th century could be expansive and democratic, as when it spoke of the common rights of the entire community. But in England, and to some extent in America, it also had an exclusive class-based dimension, and its assumption that only property-owning citizens possessed the quality known as a willingness to subordinate private passions and the desires to the public good.
Only a virtuous people are capable of freedom,
wrote Benjamin Franklin. According to John Locke, the founding father of modern liberalism, government is established to offer security to the life, liberties, and estates that are the natural rights of all mankind, and essentially should be limited to this task. Liberty for Locke and his 18th century disciples meant not civic involvement, but personal autonomy, not to be subject to the inconstant, uncertain, unknown, arbitrary will of another man. It called into question all the legal privileges and governmental arrangements that might hold back individual advancement, from economics to legalized religious intolerance. And in its starting point, that mankind possessed natural rights that no government could violate. Liberalism opened the door to the disenfranchised, women, and even slaves to challenge limitations on their own freedom. Looking at freedom then, owning property was a defining concept of freedom. The British could or would not define it as individual liberty. But from the earliest days of settlement, migrants from Britain and the continent held the promise of the New World to be liberation from the economic inequalities and widespread economic dependence of the old. John Smith had barely landed at Jamestown in 1607 when he observed,
Every man may be master and owner of his own labor and land.
The visions of liberty that immigrants brought to colonial America always included the promise of economic independence and the ability to pass a freehold on to one's children.
In 2014, the Revolution of Dignity saw the Russian-backed administration of Viktor Yanukovych replaced with a Western-aligned transitional democracy. At this moment, Ukraine spoke loud and clear, "We choose liberty." To the world, Ukraine became a free and independent nation. To Moscow, it became an unruly client state. As a result, Putin annexed Crimea and parts of eastern Ukraine under the guise of engineered separatist movements. Confronted with this violation of its sovereignty, Ukraine resisted.
In America, the half-billion slaves who labored in the mainland colonies on the eve of independence obviously stood outside the circle of free persons. For free women, their civic identity was housed within that of their fathers and husbands, and who had no legal claim to their own labor, and opportunities for economic autonomy barely existed. Women were deemed by men to be deficient in rationality, in courage, and the broad capacity for self-determination, the qualities necessary in the public-spirited citizen. Nevertheless, by the time of the Revolution, the majority of the non-slave male population were farmers who owned their own land. Among the free population, property was more widely distributed than anywhere in Europe. In colonial America, writes one historian,
lived thousands of the freest individuals the Western world had ever known.
With its wide distribution of property, and therefore an ability to participate in political life. Weak aristocratic power and the established church had far less power than in Britain. Colonial America was a society with deep democratic potential, but it took the struggle for independence to transform this society. The American Revolution was fought in the name of liberty. Throughout the colonies, British measures like the Stamp Act of 1765 were greeted by mock funerals of liberty, carefully choreographed spectacles in which a coffin was carried to a burial ground only to have the occupant miraculously revived at the last moment. Resistance to British revenue measures of the 1760 began by invoking Americans' rights as British subjects within the framework established by the British Constitution, the best that ever existed among men.
В Киеве заявляли о возможном приобретении ядерного оружия. Блок НАТО начал активное военное освоение прилегающих к нам территорий. Таким образом, планомерно создавалась абсолютно неприемлемая для нас угроза, причем непосредственно у наших границ. Россия дала упреждающий отпор агрессии. Это было вынужденное, своевременное и единственно правильное решение. Решение суверенной, сильной, самостоятельной страны. Уважаемые товарищи, сегодня ополченцы Донбасса вместе с бойцами армии России сражаются на своей земле. Вы сражаетесь за Родину, за ее будущее, за то, чтобы никто не забыл уроков Второй мировой, чтобы в мире не было места палачам, карателям и нацистам.
As the conflict deepened, however, colonial leaders came to interpret British policies as part of an immense conspiracy to destroy the liberty in America and their own resistance, not merely as a struggle over specific legislation, but as an episode in global conflict between freedom and despotism.
From a blogger from Lviv. The struggle for independence touched every family in Ukraine, whether through fighting, or the Holodomor, or Stalin's repressions. The freedom we have is built from the blood of countless Ukrainians. During virtually every century, we were fighting and failing to win our independence. Now finally we have it, so even 30 years on, we still feel the joy of freedom. In the West, you don't feel such a connection with your past because freedom came long ago, so you don't value it as we do. Even today in the Donbass, we still have to fight for our security, our language, and our territory. In my work I try to show Ukraine without stereotypes. We are typecast in the West as a country where the girls are easy, the people are poor, the men just travel abroad to work as lowly laborers, and as the place where Chernobyl happened. It's a long list of clichés. In fact, our people are very smart, we are ready to negotiate and find compromise, but we still don't know how to present ourselves to the world.
In America, the revolution reached a point of no return. 6 months later, the Declaration of Independence would legitimate American rebellion not merely by invoking British efforts to establish absolute tyranny over the colonies, but by referring to the natural, unalienable rights of mankind. The idea of liberty as a natural right became a revolutionary rallying cry, a standard by which to judge existing institutions and a justification for their overthrow. No longer a set of specific rights, no longer a privilege to be enjoyed by a corporate body or people in specific social circumstances. Liberty had become a universal, open-ended entitlement. And the contradiction between the ideal of universal liberty and the reality of a society filled with inequalities would bedevil American public life during the Revolution and long thereafter. As for the future, pain-stirring remark and common sense, we have it in our power to begin the world over again. He epitomized the sense that the American Revolution was an event of transcendent historical importance, an idea reiterated in countless sermons, political tracts, and newspaper articles of the time. He famously wrote,
"These are the times that try men's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will, in this crisis, shrink from the service of their country, but he that stands it now deserves the love and thanks of man and woman. Tyranny like hell is not easily conquered, yet we have this consolation with us: the harder the conflict, the more glorious the triumph."
Freedom is in our blood. That's why just in the past 30 years we've had 3 revolutions. One was the Orange Revolution. The second was the overthrow of President Viktor Yanukovych. Then I believe when we voted Volodymyr Zelensky into power, this was a third revolution because he's not a politician, he wasn't a part of the system. 3 times we've shown the world our desire for freedom. We don't sit on our hands when we see something is wrong. Some people think these revolutions were organized entirely by oligarchs or foreign powers, but it's impossible for massive street movements to come from a decision of some shadowy group. The sentiment for change has to exist already, only then can you throw wood on the fire. All problems in our country stem from poverty. This is the seed of corruption. It results in people getting into politics not for their country and its people but for themselves. They want to be rich. There are no parties run and funded by ordinary people. If someone wants to get into politics, they need a lot of money. Who is money in Ukraine? The oligarchs. That's why the people who end up in government here write laws that make oligarchs richer. But I think the next generation is growing up with a different mentality, that there is no point waiting for someone else to make changes, it's up to you to make the space around you better right now.
With the struggle in Ukraine came the voices of the young, teenagers watching a battle for the moral existence of their country and their destiny in its outcome.
To XRGO, everyone lived their daily lives, but one night these lives changed forever. Russia attacked our cities and forced some people to leave their homes forever or stay in a dangerous place and live in fear. But the horror cannot be eternal, the end will come, and it will be significant for our country. After our victory I will meet all my friends and family and I will say how much I love them. Also I will appreciate every moment spent with family and people of my heart. Also I will help my country to recover what it lost, I will volunteer and after graduating from school, I will enter that faculty which will be useful for Ukraine. Now we can just hope and pray for the best. And I believe that after the victory, not Ukraine will ask to join NATO, but NATO to join Ukraine, because our people have incredible strength. Glory to Ukraine.
And there you have it, different voices, but the same struggle for liberty. We see that Ukraine is not the only country fighting for freedom and liberty. There are hotspots all over the world that beg the question, what will it take to be free? Nelson Mandela wrote, "To be free is not merely to cast off one's chains, but to live in a way that respects and enhances the freedom of others." Now you can vote for the voices of freedom that we hear. Are the voices of freedom the voices of a hero, a rebel, or a saint? Send your vote and comments to arnpick@comcast.net. That's arnpick@comcast.net. We'll tally and let you know the results. We broadcast on Spotify and YouTube under the American Circus banner. If you're a YouTuber, it's the Savvy Channel. And please subscribe. And that's the way we look at the American conversation. For the Savvy Channel, this is Arnie Pickholtz. We'll see you next time. Freedom is the word I rarely use without thinking. Without thinking. Of the time when I've been loved